Welcome to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, I would appreciate it if you went back and viewed previous episodes when you get time. So, listeners, I appreciate you tuning in once again. I think this is the 5th episode in the rebirth of creativity. And I really appreciate everybody who's tuning in. I'm not sure if you can hear it or not. I did another little tweak to my sound. I may leave it like this. Who knows? But seems to be okay. But I hope everybody had a great day, whatever. I got up and mine was pretty good. It went okay when I got up, but unfortunately, since I'm out on the road at about 4, and here in Detroit, we had a little bit of a, not a snowstorm, but it snowed a little bit last night. And since I'm up so early, I'm up before the sun comes up. So, you know, it was really slippery out there this morning. And then when the sun melted, then it got a little bit better. Snow melted and everything. But early this morning, it was sketchy, to say the least, I guess. You know, and I don't know, I've gotten used to driving in the snow because that's my job. So, I mean, I've gotten kind of used to driving in it, so it's not a big deal. But it does get a little sketchy sometimes. You know, I do sometimes wish I had an extra pair of drawers because it's I don't know. I'm really not sure if you can, if there's, everybody's tires are made out of rubber. So I'm not sure if there is even a tire that you can buy that will, that would make a difference. You know, I mean, I've had winter tires on my car. I got them for the last 2 years. And then this year I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to do winter tires this year because I don't want to go through the winter tire debacle and changing them over and all that kind of stuff. I just didn't want to do that this year. So I got all season tires. And those are going okay as far as I can tell. So that went pretty good. But when the sun came up and I had some pretty good customers, and it was a pretty good day. You know, I was kind of I don't know, the attitude that I have now. I mean, it's the same one as before, but the attitude that I have now, I mean, I'm so wrapped up in my podcast that, you know, my mind is halfway, it's on as much as it needs to be for the ride share, but I'm constantly thinking about the podcast. And I listen to Blind Boy a lot, and that's where I get a lot of inspiration, without, you know, don't get me wrong. I don't copy Blind Boy, but he has a great podcast. He has a great way of saying things and everything. Go check his podcast out. But I'm not a writer or whatever, really. So, you know, sometimes I need some inspiration to kind of figure out what I'm going to say on the podcast and those kind of things. And he speaks on a lot of, I guess you could say we're kind of in the same team, I guess, but I just picked a different lane for mine because that's the way. I mean, that's anything. You can do your research and see who's doing what, and you can say, okay, I'm not going to be exactly like this person because that would be copying, but I'm going to tilt a little bit to the right. I'm going to take this lane. So that's what I did with my podcast, because it's the purpose of my podcast is not to treat anything. The purpose of my podcast is, it really doesn't have a purpose. I hope that users get from my podcast what they get, if they can get, therapy or whatever they get from my podcast, relaxation or whatever you want to call it, then I'm all for it, because that's what I want my podcast to be. I want my podcast to be an avenue. I want it to be something that you can listen to, just to say, wow, somebody else is going through what I'm going through. Somebody else is feeling the way I'm feeling. Somebody else is having the same problems as I'm having. Because at times, it's very easy to feel alone, and it's very easy to get to a point to where, you have nowhere else to go. And that's where mental illness takes a huge step in life. And especially now, now that you're constricted to, this day and age, you're working and you're making what would have been good money it would have been great money, back in 98, I think. It would have been great money. But in 2025, it's like, you need two incomes, because one, you literally hand your wife the check and, tell her, I got to go get another job, or I got to go, get the truck and hustle up, a little bit of extra money, because it's just barely making it, and that is hugely surprising, because, I look at something sometimes, and sometimes I don't know, I want to be part of the crowd so bad that I talk myself into thinking that I'm just barely making it, but don't get me wrong. I'm nowhere near wealthy. Please don't think that I am, because I'm not. Nowhere near it. I know how to work things to get, I know how to make things work. And that's just the way that I operate. I love looking at things and just kind of in my own way, on my own time, kind of figuring things out and seeing how things work, because that's just me, and then when I figure things out, then all of a sudden, people are looking at me like, wow, man, how do I do this? And how do I do that? And how do I do this? And it's like, me giving people information, especially men, for free is just not, I don't know, it's just not the way I was raised. I was raised in a totally different generation where, men didn't, you didn't touch a man without his permission. If you were a man, you most of them didn't, don't get me wrong, but if you were a man, you got up and did what you had to do and figured it out. There was nothing wrong with if you had to ask another man to, hey, show me once and I'll figure it out. And you just didn't bother anymore, unless it was a huge issue with what you were doing that you really, really needed some help with. But otherwise that you didn't bother the person. You took the information they gave you and you worked at it until you figured it out, but nowadays it's like you tell the guy something and they're asking you over and over again, like, hey, how do I do this? Okay, 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 how do I do this? It's like, dude, you gotta, unfortunately, you need to stand on your own 2 feet, because I guess what I figured out in life is that the best way to figure something out, if you're trying to do anything in life, the best way to figure it out is just to do it. Go get the stuff that needs to be got to do what you're trying to do and just start doing it. You're not going to know how to do it at first. And then it's going to be like, well, okay, let me put this together. Okay, I got that figured out. Okay, now let me figure out the next step. And then you just keep thinking about it. It may not happen overnight. It usually doesn't. And you keep researching it. Okay, this is how I do the next step. So you figure that out. Then you start figuring out the next step and the next step. Then you may figure out a little trick in between there. And, after a while, you can actually show somebody else how to do something that you didn't know how to do. But it's not going to happen, asking other people and bugging the crap out of everybody else. And don't get me wrong, I'm a good person, but it's just like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm babysitting the guy. Don't get me wrong. People have had to babysit me. Have had to show me things. But here's the point. My point is, I would love if they treated me the same way that I just said I would treat somebody else. Tell me once and let me figure it out myself. But unfortunately with jobs, they, especially like when I was working with the railroad at a job, they want you to, you literally had to be an arm's length from a guy, for like 4 months. And it's like, I can imagine being them. And I was them at one point because my patience is just non-existent, and I'm glad I didn't, I'm glad I'm not there anymore. That's the whole thing. But I guess I get it, Like I was saying before, it's it can become very, what can I say? It's not really lonely, but just it can become very box-like, because it's part of life. And that's just what life does to us, and that's what happens. I've always been the kind of person to keep to myself. I mean, I had friends growing up, don't get me wrong. Everybody's had friends, but I don't know, a lot of them were people who were, they saw my ambition and they weren't in a spot that I was. So they, rolled my coattail and got what they could get, pretty much. But I don't know, a lot of times I get people that, a lot of people ask me, why am I quiet? I'm just quiet because I try not to be involved in other people's problems. You know, I'm just not that, you know, life of the party kind of guy, you know. And, you know, number one, I'm grown and I don't really hang out like I used to. You know, I may go here and there, may go downtown and ride my bike or something like that, or, you know, take a stroll through town, or, you know, my favorite pastime is once a week, get in my Mustang and burn rubber around the block. I'll do that. And literally it's around the block. You know, I just fucking floor it because I love hearing my pipes, but I got to be careful because, you know, I do not want to be labeled as the regular Mustang owner. But I tell you what, man, that thing, when you put the pedal to the floor, holy crap. Yeah, that's, the traction control will not be coming off. But, I'm pretty much, you know, I'm growing. I'm always by myself. I'm not married anymore, but I just don't feel a need to hang with anybody or whatever, because really, you know, nobody's really on my path. So I don't really, you know, I don't get that whole, you know, kind of want to hang out type of thing. If I do hang out with people, then it's definitely a more of a, you know, guys that, you know, they have something going for themselves, and I'll go hang with them. I would love to do that. And I don't know, people think that I'm different because I go to work and I go to work and go home. You know, I'm not the type of person to really do the whole, you know, running around type thing. You know, I go to work and I go home, you know, because I'm a huge saver, you know, and that's something that's really important to me, being a huge saver, because, you know, people envy me when, you know, when something happens at the job or something, and they say, well, we need to cut back a little bit. And, you know, I go home, kick my feet up and relax, you know, because I've been saving. And now that I need the money, now that I need the money, you know, because, you know, job laid off or COVID-19 or whatever, then I can, you know, I have a little bit of a cushion, you know, and, you know, and that's pretty good. And then they, you know, a lot of people ask, you know, they kind of get a different thing from me, because they, you know, kind of look at me and I'm by myself and I really don't have any friends. I'm just keeping to myself. It's not withdrawal. It's just an understanding of myself. And it, you know, it all revolves around doing the work on myself, you know, because I don't know. I guess I feel I work too hard to let anybody, you know, break the world that I have formed around myself, you know, because that's the reason, that's most of the reason that people come around. You know, I mean, you very seldom have friends that come around. Well, I'll just say that's the one word. You very seldom have friends, but you have a lot of people, unfortunately, you know, grown men that they can see, you know, that they can get something from you. And that's the reason they come around, you know, unfortunately, you know, and, you know, it does matter when you're by yourself also. it's just less weight. You know, you feel lighter. You ain't got to drag nobody around. You ain't got to wait on nobody. You ain't got to, you know, when you bring friends, you have to wait on them, and, you know, you dragging this person around. If you go here, they following you like a puppy dog or a kid or something like that. And it's like, you know, when it's just you know, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that, you know, and that is a very important piece. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's your peace, you know, and you have to protect it, you know, at all costs. Because once you do the work on yourself, that peace you're going to protect, you know, regardless, you know, and you can pretty much feel people's intentions, when they come around. You can feel that energy when they come around you without them saying a word, because it's like, you know, when I was a kid, I used to wonder how my mother knew. She knew what I was going to do before I even did it, you know, and with regular people, good thing, you can look right through them just like my mother did, and you can see what their intentions are, you know, and some people, they just drain you, you know, just by being around you. Because I can remember where I was trying to hang around some friends who were, I'm not going to say a little less fortunate. They just didn't have the get up and go that I have. And it was like every time I came around, somebody was asking for a ride. Somebody was asking, can I borrow something? Can I use your Wi-Fi? Can I do that? Can I drive the car? It was like, and these are grown men. I mean, that was the thing that really got under my skin. These are grown men. You know, it's like, I could vaguely understand it if these were teenagers, but grown men, it's like, dude, you gotta be kidding me, you know? And I'm kind of, when I'm around people, I have a low vibration with people that want company and not conversation, because they haven't done the work on themselves. They're looking for somebody to be in whatever they're going through with them, you know, and that's something that a person has to overcome, that you have to get through those things, and you have to do it alone, unfortunately. That's just the way things have to go, you know, because it's not easy. But the good thing about it is once you go through it, then life becomes a lot more easier to deal with and to manage, you know. And it's like, if I'm around a person and, you know, usually I can feel tension, I can feel jealousy. And it's like, I've noticed with friends in the past, you know, who were in like a secret competition with me. And I was like, you know, dude, regardless, this is me and this is what I do, you know. And if I don't know how to feel about that, because on one hand, if you come around me and you make up a competition with yourself against me, then on one hand, it's a good thing, because you're using me as a motivation. But I also look at it as, you know, if you're looking at me as a motivation, then I don't know, I look at it as, I don't know, a secret jealousy of some sort. And that can be a bit of a problem. I don't let it bother me, because it doesn't stop me from getting where I'm going. So I guess at the end of the day, I guess if using me as a motivation and creating like a competition that I don't know about between you and yourself, helps you get to a better point than you're in, then I'm all for it. Because I'm all for helping people and all for, if a person is trying to catch me, and don't get me wrong, I'm not in a position where I'm, just, doing all kind of stuff that, that a person would need to try and catch me or whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, like I said, if the person is doing what they need to do to try and get to a point to where I'm at or where they think I'm at, then that's fine. Because also a lot of people, they make an assumption on what they see. And that's what they assume that you're doing, basically. And they really don't know the entire story, because it's definitely different than what they see. And it takes a lot of work to maintain the things that they assume that you are doing, or have all this money, you have all this cars and all of this kind of stuff, and the old version of me, when I look back, I think the old version of me would have fit in a lot of places, because everything that I did, everything that was me wasn't me. And everything I was doing was I was trying to fit in. The version of me now, can easily walk away from things that I know I don't fit in or I don't want to fit in. And the version of me now is very, very focused and disciplined. And, not everybody can really handle the new me, because the new me is, walking right past, the haters. And I love saying that, because I know that people hate me. And people hate me because I'm doing what I'm doing. People hate me because I had 3 cars. People hated me because I have, switch cars and everything. People hated me when I got rid of those cars and bought 2 more cars, one being a newer vehicle. People hate me because that car, it sits 95% of the time. I don't even hardly drive it, but the thing is, real quick, another part of my piece, I learned what people do with their time and their money is their business. But the American conversation has got to a point to where we have conversations and actually have the nerve to ask people, well, why did you buy it? Why did you spend that much money? It's like, dude, because it's my money. Really think about that question. Why did you buy that Lamborghini? Because it's my money. That's what I wanted to do. No matter how I feel about it or how anybody else feels about it, that's what I wanted to do with my money. And it's definitely a new way to think about things. So I don't think that a lot of people can handle the new me. And when you grow, it definitely makes circles feel small. And I believe the reason that happens is because where you're trying to go, the vision that nobody knows about where you're trying to go is much bigger than that circle. You know, I remember working at the railroad, and I keep mentioning that. It got to a point to where it was like high school, right? And I was sitting in the break room, and everybody got up and went in the back room. So I was the only one sitting up front. And I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, this is really reminding me of high school. You know, but it didn't bother me because they didn't know that where I'm trying to go is not only much bigger than them, it was bigger than that little circle of people who didn't want to be around me or were trying to make a point or whatever. It was much bigger than working at CSX. It was much bigger than living in Detroit. It was much bigger, much, much bigger. So that's what it's great to understand that, you know, when your growth is bigger than reality, then you definitely outgrow most circles. You know, and that's a good thing. You know, and when you evolve, it exposes the people who are jealous. It exposes the people who don't want to go with you. It exposes the people who are mad at you. It exposes the people who are using you. You know, it exposes a lot of things. You know, and when you're working towards growth, it definitely requires isolation. You know, because the people who you used to hang with will seem like noise. It'll seem like a lot of noise that you're just not really trying to be bothered with. You'll be doing something and somebody will be trying to talk to you, and you just won't be listening to them because you're so focused on whatever you're doing that you're just not trying to be bothered with it. And that's isolation when you're trying to reach one of your goals. You know, I mean, it's just a part of building. You're really not hiding. You know, you just don't have time to explain your vision to people who aren't going where you're going. You know, and that's a big thing to remember about who needs to go with you. Because you have to remember that when you're trying to climb a staircase, right? There are different steps. So you got all these little kids. And you think of little toddlers trying to climb a set of stairs. All of them trying to climb. So they're going up. One is at the bottom. One is in the middle. One is he trucking on up. You know, he doesn't help the one that's all the way down at the bottom. He helps the one that's right behind him, trying to keep up with him. So that's the way you look at life. That's the person that deserves to know what you're doing, to explain things, to kind of get a peek at your plan, because they're trying to be where you are. They're right behind you. They're not quite where you are, but they're right on your heels. And that's the person that needs to know, what you're doing and okay, man, how'd you do this? And okay, I got it, that kind of thing, because they're constantly making progress. You don't have to go back and get that person because that person is on your heels, and when you're working and your growth, you think better, solitude, what it does is give you clarity. It gives you clarity. And you'll find that when you're alone, your ideas, they hit harder and they come in better. You process life better because you don't have all this outside noise coming in. And of course, you recharge in silence because me personally, I don't need a crowd to feel alive. I am my own biggest cheerleader. And you learn from experience because, everybody's been burned, lied to, used, misunderstood, and you can't be bitter about it, but you definitely have to be cautious because trust isn't something people earn. It's not something that a person automatically gets. It takes time to trust somebody. But you also have to remember that if you don't trust a person, they shouldn't be around you. And me personally, people laughed at me when I first said this. I love my own company. I love my personal company, my own space. I enjoy my routines. I enjoy my thoughts. And I would definitely love having one solid person than 20 fake ones, and I don't know. It kind of bothers me when I get around people, especially nosy people, who are always looking at you and, why is he, he ain't never got no company and he ain't never doing this and he ain't never doing that. It's like, number one is none of your business. Number two, my isolation is not loneliness. My isolation is a love for being me. And that's why I created my environment so that everything that I want, I have right here in the house. I got my bike. I got my booth here. I got my movies, TV, whatever. I got everything I have or want is right here in the house or whatever. And once you do the work on yourself, like I said, you stop arguing with people and you stop entertaining drama and you stop letting folks drain you. And trying to save people that don't want to save themselves. And healing teaches you, I don't have to show up for everything. I show up for things I show up for things where I feel that it's a good environment for my happiness and my contentment. If it's not, I don't show up. When I step back and I see people's real behavior, who calls, who checks in, who disappears, silence exposes loyalty and hidden intentions because a lot of people, I ignore their phone numbers. And a lot of people, they call me, but I don't really respond because it's like you're calling me to be nosy. And I don't really want to get into that with that person because it's like if I haven't called you, why are you not getting the picture? That's the thing. I'm working on my health and my finances and my business, my mental clarity, my peace. And the way I feel, I don't owe the world access, while I'm building myself, because, I keep trying to tell people that, you should be building your own empire, And the truth is most problems come from people, not life. And it's kind of like that. The fewer people you deal with, the fewer setbacks you face. My peace, it got stronger the moment my circle got smaller. And that was common sense. You don't see it right away, but when you sit down and you look at it, you see it. But I'm still supportive to the people that deserve it. I'm still respectful to the people that deserve it. I try a thing that I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say that I do this all the time, but I'm learning to do it. I'm learning to keep my mouth shut because I do engage in unnecessary socializing with people who hate me. And I'm always there. I'm there when it matters, when it don't matter, Try not to be there for the noise, but unfortunately, I'm getting better at that. I basically function my best when I'm in control of my space. My ideas are clearer and my emotions are calmer. My energy definitely stays balanced. And being alone, it feels natural because I finally feel like I'm free. When it's just me, I love it. But at the end of the day, I'm not antisocial. I'm not cold. I'm not distant, but I am intentional. And I keep to myself because I focus on growth and peace and purpose. And not everybody deserves access to this version of me. Because that's the thing. You cannot give everybody access to you. And that's what a lot of people get wrong in life. They give everybody access to them. And that is the sad part, unfortunately. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Narrative Mindset Podcast.